The boardroom gleamed under the sharp white lights, every detail designed to display wealth and authority. The mahogany table stretched nearly the length of the room, polished so finely that the executives' reflections looked back at them like ghosts. At the head sat James Ellington, a man whose very name commanded fear in the business world. His empire spanned continents, his signature could make or break industries, and his philosophy was simple: numbers never lied, and emotions had no place in business. His eyes, steel gray and cold, flicked over the charts on the projector. A sales forecast, a market report, another acquisition proposal, it all blended together. He barely heard the executives speaking in carefully measured tones, all trying to impress him, all terrified of disappointing him. James thrived on that fear. It kept people sharp, it kept the company alive. But deep down, behind the flawless suit and sharp jawline, James Ellington was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the kind that gnawed quietly, the kind he refused to admit existed. He buried it under strategy, under contracts, under meetings stacked so tightly there was no room to think. And then it happened. A soft knock, followed by the hesitant creak of the heavy oak door. Everyone in the room frowned. Interruptions were rare. Security knew better than to let anyone near this room during a board meeting. James looked up, his irritation already forming into a scathing remark. Instead, silence fell. A little girl stood in the doorway. No more than 9, with hair falling in uneven strands around her small face, her hands clutching a worn leather book to her chest. Her shoes were scuffed, her dress too thin for the expensive air-conditioned chill of the skyscraper. But it wasn't her appearance that silenced the room, it was her eyes. Wide, fragile, yet burning with something James couldn't immediately name. "Sir," she whispered, her voice so soft the room leaned in to hear. Can you read this for me? It's important." Murmurs rippled among the directors. One cleared his throat to call for security. Another smirked, assuming it was some publicity stunt. But James raised his hand, surprising even himself. "Wait." The girl walked forward, her steps uncertain on the gleaming floor. She placed the diary, its edges frayed, its cover scratched, right in front of James. He stared at it, then at her. "My mother wrote this," she said, the words trembling. "She used to work here. Before she was gone." She swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure. "She told me once that her words could change people, if someone would only listen. I can't read all the big words yet. But you can. Please, read it, it's important." James blinked, caught off guard in a way he hadn't been in years. His instinct was to dismiss her, to call security and return to his numbers. But the girl's tiny hands had left faint smudges on the diary's surface, and something about that image froze him in place. He opened the book. The handwriting was uneven yet graceful, loops and lines dancing across yellowed pages. He began to read silently at first, but the girl's expectant eyes made him clear his throat and speak aloud. His voice, usually commanding, now softened, carrying the words of someone long gone. "Day 32, I worked another late shift. The office lights burned while my daughter slept at her grandmother's. I wonder if anyone even notices I'm still here. Maybe I'm invisible to them, but I can't afford to stop. Not when she depends on me." James faltered, his throat tightening. He flipped to another page. Day 77. "I'm so tired, but when I look at her face, I know I have to keep going. One day she'll understand why I wasn't home as much as I wanted to be. Maybe she'll forgive me. Maybe someone will see one day that we mothers are fighting battles no one else sees." The room had gone utterly silent. The executives who usually checked their watches or scrolled discreetly through emails were transfixed. James turned another page. Day 119. "They say success is measured in titles, promotions, wealth. But I think success is different. It's in the moments we show kindness, even when the world forgets it matters. If anyone ever reads this, I want them to know, I wasn't rich, I wasn't powerful, but I loved. And that love is the only thing I'll leave behind that truly matters." James's voice cracked before he could stop it. He coughed to cover the sound, but the diary felt heavy in his hands, heavier than any contract, heavier than any quarterly loss. He looked up, and the girl's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She said, "Her words could change someone," the girl whispered, her voice trembling. "Did they?" James opened his mouth, but no words came. He had faced hostile shareholders, hostile governments, ruthless competitors, but never this. Never the raw weight of a child's question. The room felt suffocatingly small, the skyscraper walls pressing in. He glanced at the executives. Their faces were pale, their eyes downcast, as if the diary had stripped them all bare. For the first time in decades, James felt a sharp stab of guilt. He thought of the nameless employees who worked late nights, the tired faces he passed without acknowledgement, the thousands whose lives fed the machine of his empire. How many mothers like hers had broken themselves within these walls, unseen, unheard? He closed the diary carefully, almost reverently, and slid it back across the table toward the girl. His voice, when it finally emerged, was quieter than anyone in that room had ever heard it. "Yes," he said, each word deliberate. "They did." The little girl gave a small, trembling smile. For her, it was enough. But for James, it was the beginning of something he could no longer ignore, the moment when the fortress he had built around himself cracked, letting in the first sliver of light. The diary stayed on James Ellington's desk long after the boardroom had emptied. It sat there like a silent witness, the leather cover cracked from years of use, the words inside etched into his memory. At night, when the city skyline glittered like a kingdom beneath his office windows, James would find himself opening it again. Not to review profit margins or contracts, but to trace the handwriting of a woman who had once been just another name on a payroll sheet. Her words haunted him. They peeled away the armor he had spent decades forging. He remembered her diary entry about invisibility. "Maybe I'm invisible to them, but I can't afford to stop." The thought gnawed at him. How many others like her walked his halls unseen? How many sacrifices were buried under the empire he had built? For days, James couldn't shake it. Even during meetings, while executives rattled off figures, his mind drifted back to the mother's words: kindness, love, legacy. He had chased wealth and power his entire life, but when he pictured himself gone, what remained? Numbers in a ledger, stock tickers flashing green and red, or silence, emptier than the boardroom after a meeting adjourned. One late evening, as he lingered alone in the skyscraper, he saw a cleaning woman wiping down the glass doors. Her shoulders were stooped, her movements weary. Normally, James would have walked past without a word. This time, he paused. "What's your name?" he asked. She startled, eyes wide, then whispered, "Marta, sir." James nodded, awkward, uncertain of why he had even asked. "Thank you, Marta, for everything you do here." Her lips parted in surprise, then curved into a small, genuine smile. "You're welcome, Mr. Ellington." It was nothing, a brief exchange, easily forgotten. Yet for James, it was monumental. For the first time, he had seen an employee not as a cog in his machine, but as a person. The next morning, he walked into the boardroom with a proposal that stunned his directors. "We are restructuring our priorities," James said firmly, setting the diary on the table. "This company is no longer just about profit margins. We are going to invest in our people, childcare programs, flexible hours for parents, scholarships for employees' children. We will honor the lives that build this empire." The room erupted in disbelief. One director scoffed openly. "With all due respect, James, that sounds like charity, not business." James's gaze hardened, though his voice was calm. "It's humanity, and it's overdue. We cannot call ourselves leaders while we ignore the very people who keep this company alive." The arguments lasted for hours, projections, warnings, fears of shareholder backlash. But James didn't back down. For once, he wasn't driven by the numbers on a screen. He was driven by ink-stained pages, by a child's trembling voice in his boardroom, by the echo of a mother who had believed her words could change someone. And she had. Over the months that followed, changes rippled through the company. Employees whispered in shock when new childcare facilities were announced. Parents wept quietly when flexible schedules were approved. Scholarships were offered to the children of single mothers, the first recipients holding their acceptance letters with trembling hands. The empire James had built didn't crumble, it transformed. Not everyone was pleased. The press questioned his motives. Some investors threatened to withdraw. Competitors mocked him. But as James walked the halls of his company, he saw something he had never noticed before: gratitude in the eyes of those who had once been invisible. And then, one crisp autumn afternoon, the little girl returned. She stepped into his office with her grandmother, dressed a little better this time, her hair neatly tied back. She carried a folded piece of paper, clutching it nervously as she approached his desk. James rose immediately, not as a CEO but as a man whose life she had unknowingly redirected. "Hello," she said softly. "I wanted to give you something." Her hands shook as she placed the paper before him. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was crooked, letters uneven, but the words pierced deeper than any polished speech. "Thank you for listening. Mama said her words could change someone. And they did. Now, so did mine." James's chest tightened. He blinked rapidly, fighting the burn behind his eyes, but when he looked at her small, hopeful face, he no longer cared if anyone saw his weakness. Slowly, he stood, walked around the desk, and knelt so he could meet her at eye level. "You've changed me forever," he whispered. "And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure your mother's words aren't forgotten." The girl threw her arms around his neck, and for the first time in years, James felt something richer than power, deeper than wealth, connection. From then on, the diary never left his office. Sometimes, during late nights when doubts returned, he would open it and read aloud as if the girl's mother were still in the room, reminding him of the path he had chosen. He even had one line from her diary framed on the wall behind his desk, where no financial report could overshadow it. "Success is in the lives we touch while we still can." Visitors often asked about the quote, and James would smile faintly. "That," he'd say, "is the foundation of this company now." Years later, when people spoke of James Ellington, they no longer described him as the ruthless tycoon. They spoke of the man who transformed an empire with a diary, who measured success not in billions but in lives uplifted. And somewhere in those conversations, always, was the story of a little girl who had dared to walk into a boardroom and ask a simple question. "Can you read this for me? It's important." It was. And it changed everything.